Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys. All right, so today's talk, it's not overly technical, so perhaps a break from some of the other technical talks that you guys have been listening to so far. Instead, it's a little bit anecdotal. It's less of a case study, I guess, more of an insight into one particular project we worked on halfway through last year and this year for a flour brand called The Healthy Baker. I guess just some key sort of takeaways I hope from today will be how we work with our clients and how that's kind of being reshaped as we move into more of an agile environment if we haven't already. And two, the client's brief isn't always correct, right? So they're the kind of two key takeaways, hopefully, from today. All right, let me just get this started. Whoop. So by way of introduction, I'm from an agency called G Squared. We're headquartered here around the corner, actually, on Riley Street in Darlow. We've also got an office in Brisbane. I started the agency about 5 years ago with another guy called George, which is why I've got this lame name now, G Squared. There's always that awkward start of a meeting where if it's just me or if the other Georges come along with me, it's like, did you call it G Squared because there's two Georges? They're like, yeah, it's pretty awkward. Anyway, so we're now a team of 35, as I said, most of which are here in Darlow. We don't just do web. Web's a big part of the agency, I guess, for us. Like a lot of you, if you are digital thinkers, web's normally like an entry point. And then from there, we have some sort of complementary or supplementary services like paid media, content, all that kind of stuff. Our web team, even though we say we're platform agnostic, we're kind of 98% WordPress. Naturally, the briefs normally fit it, but also, we find it's the easiest system to work with. As I said, I'm not technical, so ignore the lack of technical talk, jargon, and so on in this talk, but I do come from a UX UI background, so that's the sort of lens that I'm looking at this through. All right, just a quick show of hands. Does anyone recognize the logo? Okay, a few of you. I always hope this experiment doesn't go wrong. Does anyone recognize the product? Hands up if you recognize the product. Okay, thank God. There's more of you that recognize the product. So we were approached by this brand, Healthy Baker. They're run by this big Australian agribusiness called Manildra Group. They're a $3 billion company, and they have one digital person. Which quite often is the case for us all when we're dealing with clients, particularly ones in fast-moving consumer goods or in retail or whatever. So the Healthy Baker, they approached us with a particular brief. This brief was the Healthy Baker's website was a piece of crap. It was very old. It was running, I think, off some sort of custom system. And the brief initially was, we want to move to a more, this one digital person and the board of Manildra Group were thinking, we need to move to an e-commerce model, which was the brief. So we want an e-commerce solution built. They didn't have any platform preference, but we want to start moving boxes online, basically, was the whole premise of the brief. So when we approached the brief, obviously we responded to it, ended up winning it, but we never really gave much thought to the e-commerce element because naturally we didn't feel that the brief actually fit the solution. So the experiment that I just ran with you with the comparing of the logo and the product was a key insight that we drew from some research that we did. So moving forward, the assumed issue was that the website wasn't moving boxes. The research that we conducted found that fundamentally it was a brand and product challenge, not necessarily one that had to tie in with some sort of business results like moving boxes. We all do the normal grocery purchase. Would you ever, in isolation, buy flour online, for instance, right? I'm going to go get the milk, the eggs. I'm not going to buy flour at Woolies because I'll go home and do that online. It was quite a big jump to make, right? To think that I'm going to go buy flour online. But this was the brief, and a good client of ours still work together, but that was their assumed issue. And you can tell, we've all worked, particularly when we're working with bigger brands, that the message, the brief normally comes from the top, or the assumed issue, that everyone else is selling online. Why can't we sell online? We need to sell more online. Digital's not making us money. So that was the assumed issue. What we found, though, in our discovery, so after various workshops that we ran with both internal and external stakeholders, we found that the issue was very different. And the discovery process that we undertook involved, obviously your normal kind of UX approach, user persona definition, better understanding the needs and requirements, developing user flows and maps to address the issues. Now, the problem was there was a very big requirement for this to be fixed scope, fixed fee, like the complete opposite of Agile, right? So it was a difficult one for us because the brief didn't match the solution, but at the same time we had to come in with fixed scope, fixed fee. So what we ended up doing was doing a big chunk of work at the start that involved these stakeholder workshops and research and so on. So following all of that and all the work that we did in the initial stages, we found that the issue was very different. The issue instead was that the product had great shelf recognition, call it, because it's in Woolies, Coles and so on. So great shelf recognition, but the brand had very low awareness and very low brand equity. In fact, when the Healthy Baker contacted us, and I was responding and doing the kind of pre-sale stuff, I didn't recognize the brand, but then when I went home, I realized that I had the Healthy Baker flour in my pantry. So that fundamentally shows that the issue there, right? Like I was talking to them and then I went home and go, sure, there it is. Yeah, well, that's Healthy Baker. I know that flour brand. But so no one recognized the name, no one recognized the brand, but we all recognized the product, which is a testament to their product teams and a testament to the fact that it's the only reusable plastic container and so on in the flour aisle, but very low brand equity. So that's why we call this talk with flipping the brief, because we flipped the brief. We went back to the client and said, even though it's a bigger project for us and it's going to be more revenue, the project's going to probably be more enjoyable from a technical standpoint, this should not be an e-commerce solution. In fact, it should be the opposite. It should be an engagement-first, content-driven solution that moves away from, like CRO tactics and all that kind of stuff to move boxes. Instead, we should be looking to drive engagement. So why push boxes online when the problem's brand awareness? Fundamentally, that's the way we came to. So the research that we conducted actually drove a couple of key insights. And I mean, this project wasn't some huge budget UX project either. It was done on the smell of an oily rag, and therefore the research that we had to do had to be quite lean. But the research drove some key insights, and that was, it's very easy to do, and I'm sure that you guys have done it in some projects that you've been involved with too, but we just created a survey, sent it out to a couple of sample customers, and then the sample size ended up being about 40 or so customers, and these are the insights that it drove. So 93% of people were more likely to utilise a brand or commercially driven website if it had resourceful content. It's pretty obvious. 88% of people confirmed that they actively search for and review recipes online. Again, I think even if we made that assumption without the data, it's an assumption we would all probably draw. And 91% of people view a recipe in meal planning and print, share, and save it for later. And that was probably one of the most critical insights, because instead of thinking about this solution as an on-the-spot solution or a stand-up vis-a-vis a sit-down journey or whatever it might be, this is something that's happening before mealtime. So it's happening the evening before the morning of mealtime. So it's quite a considered journey. In fact, your common user in Australia is browsing between 4 to 6 recipe publishers at the same time. So, I mean, it's the kind of normal journey, right? I think the stat now is users are browsing in multi-tabbed environments, users are browsing between 5 and 7 tabs simultaneously because of the normal search journey. Open a new tab, open a new tab, open a new tab, open a new tab, and then browse. Users are doing that same thing with recipes. So that fundamentally meant for us that we had to make sure that this system, through both the UX and the UI, popped and ensured that it didn't look like your normal recipe portal with ingredients on the left and activity on the right, or steps on the right. The last key statistic that was driven from this research is that 78% of people are more likely to engage with a recipe when there's increased visuals and increased visual cues and interactivity. We looked at things like micro interactivity, looked at things like animations to help drive what would be kind of traditional look and feel for a recipe. As I said, ingredients on the left, steps on the right. So as I mentioned, though, that research drove 2 critical decisions that we brought into the project. One, that the system needs to pop from a UI perspective, and 2, we needed to build really easy click-to-print and click-to-share functionality. That, of course, driven from the insight that people are viewing and engaging with recipe portals during meal planning, which is morning of or night before the meal. So, this is something that I came up with one of our designers, and then the rest of the team had to deliver and implement this, and they hated me for it. But the team had to deep etch 378 actual ingredient assets. So what we built into the WordPress system using ACF was the ability for the client, when uploading their recipes, to type in a particular ingredient, say it's eggs, with like a sort of presumptive search kind of functionality. It comes up, click it, and then automatically in that recipe, it will present it in this visually appeasing way. So what we had to do was first consolidate all the recipes, all Australian recipes on the internet, and create a list of the main ingredients that are being used. That ended up being 380 or so ingredients. Then, as I said, our team deep etched these visuals to build it into the system to allow the client to easily create recipes, but also the user to have that more visually stimulating experience, to allow the recipe portal to pop based on our research, and so on. So that was one of the first things that we did, one of the first decisions that we made from a UI perspective. And then we had to look at adaptive journeys, because it was actually inconclusive when we, normally it's like, do we design mobile or desktop first? And it's normally decision driven by, Google Analytics or other data that's supplementary. But this one, it was inconclusive, because a lot of the time people are browsing recipes during what we call a stand-up journey. So stand-up journey meaning on a portable device, but not a considered portable device journey, a stand-up journey. So they're on the train, or they're walking to work, or they're doing whatever, because we're all time poor and you're frantically trying to plan mealtime. And so people are normally doing this in a stand-up journey. But there was overwhelming statistics that showed us that there was a desktop-heavy audience at a particular time. So at night, the data showed that recipe websites and their old website was being used in a more non-portable device environment. So we couldn't really make, there was no actionable insight to drive a key decision in how we started the design process. So we had to really implement adaptive design here. So you'll see, if you look at the system, that there are particular elements that have been added and removed to suit not just a broad portable device journey, but a segmented portable device journey. So mobile, bigger mobile, tablet, and so on. So the main thing to utilise to recognise is that the website, for the most part, utilises a one-column grid as a tip of the hat, I guess, to this more adaptive environment, to allow us to add and remove elements quite easily. But it also is, as I mentioned before, that very visually appeasing style of UI. That's just a kind of snapshot of that adaptive environment. Another key or critical user interface decision that was made was that we wanted to make the experience feel like you're in the kitchen. Again, we all have almost a nostalgic attachment to meals, sharing a meal, and particularly our own meals in our own homes, and particularly our own kitchen. So the more that we could try to replicate that feeling, the more sense of attachment these people will start feeling toward the brand, the more stickiness the website would therefore have, the increase of lift in brand equity subsequently. So this whole kitchen bench environment, which you'll see if you visit the website, and I think I've got a sample of it on the next slide, assets and elements kind of slide in and out as you're scrolling, and almost as you're kind of scrolling down a kitchen bench. I think this is, yes, I think this is a sample. Yeah, so this is kind of what I was talking about before. You're almost scrolling down the kitchen bench as the flour trail, almost like, breadcrumbing your journey. And we ran this really unique test for our 3 months post-launch. We used a lot of iconography as buttons instead of text as buttons. And it was a decision that we didn't base on any key actionable insight. Instead, it was something quite similar to the last speaker. We wanted to trial and learn based on letting the data drive the strategy. So those pluses that we used as buttons, we split tested a bit of micro interactivity behind them. We split tested a subtle pulse, and to the naked eye, it wouldn't be at all visible. It might be if you've got a keen eye or you're a UI designer, but to the naked eye, generally, it wasn't so obvious. So we ran a split test, pulsing button against a non-pulsing button for 3 months. The lift on the pulsing button was a 24% increase in click-through rate on those buttons. So that, it enters that school of thought again around, what we call like the red button theory. So if I put a red button here at the front and it says, do not press this button, we'd all feel inclined to press the button. And because with digital, there's a unique lack of tangibility with digital, right? We can't touch, we can't feel it. So we have this innate urge, this almost primal urge to touch, feel, and anywhere that there's movement, we want to see what it does. So that red button theory came to life in this particular experiment and other experiments that we ran with this project and others, in that when there is some sort of micro-interactivity, whether it's subtle pulsing, whether it's a particular call to action wobbling, whatever it might be, we all have this almost subconscious feel and this urge to interact with those elements. And that was brought to life here in the pulsing buttons, but in other things that we did too. Now, this is the most surprising part. Now, that bounce rate, I know, seems ridiculous. There was actual business results that were tied back to all that work that we did, the initial UX work, and then through to the implementation through the UX and UI theory, and obviously the front-end development. Users remained relatively similar. There was no paid launch here, so this is all organic, basically. Page views increased, the pages per session increased, which means obviously the engagement with the website, people are viewing more recipes, was increased, and the average session duration was increased by over 30 seconds. Now, the bounce rate isn't below 1% right now. I think it's at 9 or 11%. But for the first 4 weeks we were running this data, the returning visitor rate was quite high. I think it was about 60 or 70% returning visitors, because generally, I mean, if you're buying the Healthy Baker product, people are generally quite loyal to their fast-moving consumer good or equivalent items. So for the most part, it was people returning that had already engaged with the previous solution. So for them, it was like, whoa, look at this. What's going on here? So they engaged with the website, and the bounce rate was 99 out of 100 users were actually progressing through further than the homepage. As I said, it's not at that rate now, but that came down from an 80% bounce rate previously. Now, in closing, I think there's a couple of key things that we took away from this, and it's potentially something that we can all discuss together as the WordPress community and wider digital community. But had this project been approached initially in that more agile environment, right? If we had that process of discovery together, we helped them build the brief, we helped them build what they thought was the ideal end outcome, we wouldn't have come to that kind of reverse briefing or flipping the brief process, right? So when we came in, we pitched, we won the job, we went in, we go, all right, guys, first thing, we need to run some workshops, because I don't know why you think you need to move flour online. It's not going to happen. As I said, people in isolation aren't going to go and buy flour online and then go to Woolies and get their eggs and milk. So the key thought process that it evoked internally for us was, if we just went in with that pure play agile methodology, and we ran that discovery initially, would we have had this kind of process, which in some ways in client agency relations, quite an awkward thing to do, to push back in that way. Like, this big function that you guys thought was the breadwinner, ignore the pun, was not at all viable and probably won't be worth the investment for you. So if we approach it with that more agile methodology initially, I think we would have avoided the problem. So it has created a little bit more of an agile first way of thinking for us. But the awkward part is every client, particularly ones that aren't so digital first, have this appetite for fixed scope, fixed fee, fixed brief, and there you go. So it's something that I'm keen to learn more about, as well as I chat to you guys hopefully more today, is how do we grapple away from this awkward hybrid methodology that we all seem to be in, where we're still testing early, we're still operating in pseudo sprints, but normally to a fixed scope or fixed fee. So they're my closing remarks. I'm happy to take any questions, if there are any. Yep.
Do they have a lift in sales? Simply, did they have a lift in sales?
Yeah, it's a good question, and they did. But we can't attribute that solely to the new digital solution. But they had, I think it was a 3% lift in sales across their major retailers, so Woolies and Coles. Attributable to a little bit of a brand tweak that they did as well at the same time, but I think partly as well to the digital solution, which we ended up, which is also a key insight, driving online and offline together. We had them change the packaging slightly to push the recipe portal as well. So, we could start engaging a lot of their existing customers and creating that brand, that web stickiness to lift brand equity. But yeah, there was a general lift in sales. I'm not sure how much we can attribute to the digital solution, but there was.
Huh.
How would you approach like your smaller business with the same approach when they're so adamant in their minds that this is the way I want it, and you actually sit down with them, you go through it and you go, we need to sit through a website strategy session for you, but they go, no, I just need a website. Like, there's this sort of pushback that comes, oh, I just need this, I need that, and then you come down to, what do you want to actually get out of your website? What do you actually want it to do? What's your business like?
Yeah.
Trying to convert that customer over to what they actually need. It sounds like that's what you've just done.
Yeah, I think the important thing, and we often get into the habit of it when dealing with clients, is like the sample size of one argument. So when we start saying, I think, or this is the best way to do it, I think the client automatically puts up their barriers and thinks, you know, why do you know my business any better than me? So I think what we did here is we just let the data drive the solution, right? So we took a step back and we just said, this is what the data's telling us to do. It would be remiss of us to ignore it. It's the most dangerous thing we can all do is the sample size of one. I tell my team, and me particularly in dealing with clients, is that we can never really look at my story. We can't speak anecdotally. We need to let the data drive the strategy. So there's a common thing that always happens with my clients is that we do a bit of work in sort of children's products, whether it's financial products or otherwise, and a lot of the time, some of the clients will say, well, you know, my daughter likes this, and my daughter didn't really like this part of the product. And that's a very dangerous way to be approaching anything, particularly digitally, particularly in digital with the diverse user personas that are likely using your website or solution. So yeah, normally we just let the data drive the strategy. So we just put the data in the middle of the table, said the conclusions that we can draw from this should be black and white, and normally there's no argument after that. But I take your point, it is very difficult. It's a very big barrier or hurdle to overcome when dealing with clients, in that they'll always say, I know the business, I know the market, I know my clients, customers better than you. Why is this new approach that you're suggesting any better than our current one, or whatever it is? But yeah, data driving the strategy is normally the answer.
Thank you. I can just imagine that data research at the start would have a significant impact on the budget of the project, and there'd be a lot of people who would kind of balk at that at the start. I'm guessing that you've got a certain target market that can afford that, but for certain people who are at the lower end, which is I think kind of where we were coming from, you know, where it's very hard to start providing that sort of data. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, well, we don't just, I mean, these guys didn't have a big budget, and that's the user work that we do with the bigger brands would be that example where there was a big budget allocated to it and so on. This was on the smell of an oily rag. So here we ran one workshop, which is inexpensive, particularly if you only want to allocate 1 or 2 people on your side, and sometimes just one. Like sometimes I just run workshops to bring the cost down. And also we created a survey and also got the client involved. We said, share this out to some of your sample clients and customers. And normally it's as easy as that. I mean, even with our sort of smaller projects that we're dealing with, we still need some sort of data. When the data's inconclusive, if we've run GA and Hotjar for a bit and still say, oh, there's some parts we probably need to get some maybe qual data on, we'll create a survey monkey very easily and get the client to drive it, get the client to send it to their customers and clients. But yeah, of course I take your point that it's not always available, particularly with clients. They'll balk at the cost of research and go, we don't need research, what do you need? Just design and build a bloody website, you know? So, but a lot of the time we need, if you want the website to be foolproof and last the test of time, I mean, websites nowadays are getting redone every 3 years. You want it to last 5 years plus. You need to let the data drive that. And yeah, it's as simple as creating a survey, getting the client to drive it out. That's normally what I find. And we have a lot of clients that would balk at the cost of research, and normally I just cost that into the design. I won't have it as a separate line item because they'll say, take that out. That can save us $3,000, whatever, you know, so yeah.
Thank you, excellent.
We've got time for plenty more questions if anyone's got any.
I know I'm probably not your average age group who's going to go online and order your flour, but I've been to a website where it's got the animation button and the oh, by the way, these dots you can scroll, and I really appreciate that initially. It's like, oh yes, thank you for helping me get orientated. But do you actually provide something on your website where people can just click and say, okay, enough now? Because the animation actually drives some of us away from the website. It's
a very good point. And again, it's not something there's no hard and fast rule with that, particularly that red button theory where generally speaking, and it's a broad generalisation, people do have an appetite or an urge to engage with things that are animated. It comes down to, again, letting the data drive the strategy. We had some other parts that were animated on their About Us page. We had a very big immersive, not illustrated, but animated experience. It's telling their story from paddock to plate, because they're farmers, from the paddock all the way through to your plate. And we found that there was a very low engagement on that page. So we dropped a lot of the animation on that particular page. So it's about letting the learnings drive the evolution of the solution. But for the most part, the answer is not always micro animations and interactivity. It's dependent on what the end goal is. But also there's that balancing act we need to make between animations and nice UI and good front end development and accessibility and the particular standards we need to adhere to from an accessibility standpoint. A lot of the time there's contrast errors, there's a lot of other accessibility errors that come with running good animations and so on. So we need to, I think, it's a balancing act and it's a difficult one. Project specific, I think, is the answer, and letting the data drive the evolution. If it's not working, drop it quickly, do something different.
So once you got them on the animation, how did you actually drive them to the product page and get more sales?
So, I mean, that was the point was that we didn't do that. Yeah, so the point was that we weren't, there's a product page, it's more informational, but I guess it was more subliminal than anything else. Every recipe is using a Healthy Baker product. So every single recipe that people are clicking, sharing, printing, using that night or the next day is using a Healthy Baker product. So we didn't have to sell. This principle's accurate in a lot of cases where if you provide resource, it will normally end up in some sort of business goal, whether that's lifting sales or whatever else. We're providing free content that includes the Healthy Baker as a product. Generally, that lifts, that will lift their product sales by virtue of the fact that people will be buying that to include in that recipe. So yeah, the initial brief was how we need you to get people to our product page to transact, and our reverse brief was we need to do the opposite of that. Yeah.
Thanks. How long does it take from the brief, initial brief until the finished product? And what is the most difficult part of the project?
Yeah, that's a good question. This whole thing from initial client consultation, reverse briefing, all the way through to the end, I think was 3 months. That was actually quite lean and quite quick relative to other projects that we've done of a similar capacity. The most difficult part, I think, was the initial stages. It was really, it almost got heated at some stages with the client because it came from a board level, right? Think about this big Australian family-owned business from a board level, wanting to have a particular way that this system works, and they wanted to transact, but ultimately that's not the right approach. How do you tiptoe around that without upsetting people? So that was probably the most difficult part for us. Once we got that operational rhythm, people understood that there's data that's backing up what we're saying. From then on, it was pretty smooth. But yeah, that initial stage, no doubt about it, was the difficult part. It's good exercise.
Hey, George. Did you have to do any SEO to get the recipes to rank, or was it just sort of natural? And what if the recipes just never ranked?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think there's two parts to the answer. One, the initial strategy wasn't so reliant on inbound, so on search inbound or any other inbound channel. It was more reliant on engaging existing customers. They had a big amount of customers that weren't engaging with the brand, so the first challenge was getting existing customers to engage. The second part to it was there was SEO work involved. We've got a sister agency that's an SEO agency, and they were involved in the implementation. So they did things like changed the recipe headings to be a little bit more long-term search friendly. They obviously did some work with the metadata to make sure that it was compliant and easily indexed by Google Spiders and so on. But yeah, it wasn't like a search first launch strategy for them. It was more about how do we engage. They're selling thousands of flour containers a day. How do we engage those people first? Then second to that, how can we look at an inbound strategy? So for them, they did do the foundational work from a search perspective, things like changing the recipe titles to be long tail friendly and so on. But for them, it was more about their existing customers first.
Hey George, thanks for the talk. I'm just intrigued a little bit about the workshop that you said you sometimes run.
Yep.
What did that involve, and who was there, and what kind of stuff do you talk about, and what are you looking for?
Yeah, good question. Workshops for us there's no cookie cutter rule or approach or agenda. So normally, and actually when we first started running workshops about 3 years ago, it was quite a daunting experience because you think you need to be some, qualified workshop or activity planner. But for the most part, it can be 3 parts for us. First is about users and objectives, and it's a really easy exercise. You get sticky notes, get everyone in the room to write their users who they think will be using the website. Normally there's a lot of consistency amongst them, and you put them on the wall and group them together. Then you get them all to attach an objective to that user. Then you attach them you attach the sticky note to the other sticky note, so there's a user and objective. That's the first part of the exercise. The second part is generally on project specifics. We can start wireframing together. We can start doing all that kind of stuff. And the third part is miscellaneous. So the third part is dependent on the project. If it's a large project from a technical perspective, there's a bit allocated at the end to talk about functionality, how we want it to work, how we want it to interface to client, how we want it to interface to user. But every workshop that we run has a different agenda. There's no hard and fast rule. The main thing is, what we've learned is when we don't have a workshop or the availability to workshop with clients, if they're overseas or if they don't have availability, we find that the solution, the design process and development process and review takes a lot longer because there's a lot of grey areas, there's a lot of things that weren't discussed. So yeah, and in terms of who's involved, we run a day of workshops with some clients where we have to involve different people just because you don't want your marketing team with your sales team because sometimes sales might be speaking different language to marketing or advertising. But for the most part, it's normally some sort of either ownership or high-level stakeholder, and then anyone that's in marketing or digital team. So we've run workshops as small as 3 or 4 people, some as big as 20. Yeah.
This will be the last question, and then we're going to morning tea. Yay!
Hi George, thanks for the talk.
Thanks.
It's sort of related to the SEO question, and I understand that clients won't always tell you which other agencies they're working with or if they've carried out any other activity, but do you know if anything else happened around the launch of the site?
I know that they launched a brand tweak. So the Healthy Baker logo, which you would have seen in the slides, that it got a bit of a facelift. That coinciding with the packaging, a rebrand of the packaging, coinciding with us including a shout out to the recipe portal on the packaging. I think that was the main driver. They did work with a brand agency who we worked collaboratively with. This is the other thing to note. Like sometimes in agency world, and that's my world, and it might not be everyone's world here, but sometimes in agency world, we're a little bit scared of collaborating with other agencies, particularly when there's competing services. Our lesson that we've learned over the past few years is that the more you collaborate, the more likely it is you'll all keep the work, rather than trying to kind of be the lead agency. It's an older school of thought that there's a lead agency and then the rest of the agencies, whether it's search, copywriting, whatever, report to the lead agency. That's how they used to do it in the old advertising days. I don't think that's the case anymore for us. I think we're more collaborators and partners in a project. But yeah, we worked with a brand agency, and that's who was helping us bring to life the recipe solution on the packaging. And I think they had one other agency that was involved just doing some paid stuff for them, but it was more above the line, more traditional media.
Yeah, so, that was my question. So was there TV, was there retail promotions, or they not really told you?
More point of sale. So it was more, they worked with Woolies and Coles and stuff to bring to life shelf activations and that kind of stuff. But they did that the whole way through. That wasn't to coincide with the launch. Yep. So that remained quite constant through. But yeah, there were other agencies involved, certainly, and we collaborated and partnered with them on the project.
Thank you.
I'd like to get everyone to clap, George.
Thank you.